Another day, another installment of Owl House Extravaganza. Today we're talking about understanding Willow. And as an outspoken fan of Willow, I'm sure you can imagine I like this one quite a lot. So already, you can expect a pretty positive review going into this. I also really like the character of Amity, and as much as this episode is about Willow, it's also about Amity. In fact, I'd argue it's more about Amity, at least in terms of character development, where the it being about Willow part comes in terms of character backstory. Like, we don't get Willow's entire life story here or anything, but interestingly, she's basically the only character whose backstory we've gotten in any kind of detail up to this point. And I think that remains relatively true up through the end of the season. Like, we get aspects of Ida and her sister's backstories and come the last couple episodes of the season, but not enough to really understand them on a fundamental level yet. In this episode, though, we see what was a fundamental part of Willow's formative years, and it really helps to understand her better as a person. The episode primarily focuses on the fact that the kids at Hexside are learning picture magic today, where you take snapshots of literal memories from someone's mind that are also simultaneously kind of the memories themselves, but not really. They're more just like sympathetic to the memories. If something happens to the images, the memories can be damaged too. And it's a little odd, because first of all, we learn very quickly that even though these are just snapshots of larger memories, the snapshots being damaged can ruin the entire memory, and that even minor damage to a memory can really mess a person up mentally. So it seems reckless to do this just so that you can visualize a piece of your memory for other people to see. And then even more so when we see that they just leave these memory pictures hanging up in the classroom unsupervised to develop. And also I would expect this to be like, I don't know, oracle magic or something, maybe. But the only one out of Luce and Willow who should be learning that kind of magic is Luce. So why was it specifically Willow's memories that they were yanking out of her head today? Is this just a general kind of magic that everybody is supposed to learn? Like, it facilitates the rest of the story of this episode, but in terms of setup, this was kind of baffling to me, and more so probably than anything else in this show so far, save for maybe a couple of moments early on that didn't involve major recurring characters really as much. This just felt so, I don't know what the word would be, setup-y, I guess is the best way to put it. It felt like this was only here to establish the bulk of the episode. That this did not grow organically from the story, that it only exists so that the writers could tell the story that they wanted to tell and couldn't be bothered to come up with a more plausible way to get us there. But it is a minor complaint in what is otherwise a fantastic character episode, because, and this stems back to the fact that she denied previously while they were out in the halls together that this wasn't the case. Amity and Willow used to be friends, and it would be a disgrace to her within her own friend group if that became public knowledge. Yeah, this is happening on the wake of one of her friends, I don't remember which one, I don't know their names, inviting Amity and the other friend to a birthday party. So she's got this reminder in her head of this relationship with them, and seeing how exclusive this party is, it also serves as a reminder of how, let's say, tentative this relationship actually is, right? Like, keep in mind, we know from previous episodes that Amity does not like her preppy friends, and she is opening up to friendships with other people. And clearly she's been developing a friendship with Luce, but because Willow was such a late bloomer, because it took her so long to really develop her magic, which is a thing that was hinted at earlier, we see it a little more definitively here. The preppy girls that Amity usually hangs out with still make fun of Willow for that to this day. So being associated with Willow would be harmful to Amity's image in a way that being associated with other students wouldn't necessarily be. On top of that, there is something else about their history together that we learn about throughout the course of this episode that makes the thought of being associated with Willow painful for Amity. So in one of the photos that was pulled out of Willow's head, one that she tried to flip around so that it wouldn't be visible because she doesn't want to think about this time in her life either. It was actually Luce who turned it back around because the picture shows her being friendly with Amity and Luce hopes to get them back together as friends and therefore didn't listen when Willow told her to drop it. But Amity sees that picture and rather than just flip it around again like Luce did, which is the thing she totally could have done, in order to keep people from seeing it through the door to the classroom and making that connection between the two of them, she tries to use the fireball spell that she just recently learned to burn her face out of the picture. And granted, she is a child, but I would have expected her to have also had this lesson at some point and know how dangerous that is. So this is just a really stupid freaking thing. To be fair, though, I do like trying to be fair to these characters, because again, they're children. She did try to only destroy the part of the photo that had anything to do with herself, right? But then the fire spreads, and a whole bunch of the photos are messed up, and now Willow's got amnesia. She's not like a vegetable or anything, but she doesn't know much more than her name, including, like, how to sit on chairs and stuff. It's pretty bad. So, not wanting anybody to get in serious trouble for this, but also wanting to fix it, Gus and Luce and Amity take her back to the owl house to get help from Ida. And Ida tells them the only way to fix this is to go into Willow's head and physically reconstruct the core bits of those memories, so that the memories themselves heal. And Luce, being the kind of nosy friend, it's really the most delicate way to put it too, who would have turned that picture back around, even though Willow told her to drop it, and even if she didn't intend to drop it, she didn't have to turn the picture back around to continue to try to get Willow and Amity to be friends again, right? Luce is thrilled by this. She wants to go in her friend's head and see more of her friend's past memories. And if I have one thing to complain about in this episode, it's that even though, while yes, Amity is the one who did this, she's the one who caused this, she did not have to set that photo on fire, Luce did set it in motion, right? She does have some responsibility in this, just like in the immediately previous episode of this, Really Small Problems. Even though it was Tybalt's plan that got everybody shrunk, and he did trick King, who maybe should have known better, but he's a pretty naive character, so I wouldn't really expect him to. But it is Tybalt's who shrinks them and tries to get them eaten by animals. But King still, even if it was accidentally, set in motion what happened to them. He's the one who made that possible in the first place, and he owns up to that. And in this episode, Luce never owns up to her part in what happened. She's confronted by Willow over it, but it's done so in a playful kind of way, where Luce makes an excuse. Like, we don't even see the confrontation happen on the screen. That's how unimportant it's treated by this episode. And again, I'm not saying that Luce is literally responsible for the memories burning. Just, I expected her to learn not to be so nosy or something, and that never actually happens. Anyway, Luce and Amity do go into Willow's head. They're told by Ida to watch out for the inner Willow, who might be able to help them on their task. And so when we see in Willow's mind a humanoid fiery creature that doesn't have any distinguishing features, i.e. if this is someone we know, there's no way to identify them as such. And considering that the fire that it's cloaked in is the same color as the fire that Amity introduced to these memories with her spell, it's obvious that that's the inner Willow that she has been, let's say, set fire to. I say that as if it's metaphorical, but it's literal too, by what happened, and now she is actively working to spread the damage. Because this is kind of the last straw. she's so done with this now that she's not trying to ignore the pain of her past the way that Willow was up to this point, that she has decided she's going to actively perpetuate this damage and try to erase Amity from Willow's past entirely, regardless of how much damage that does to Willow herself. And what's of note here is that as all this is going on, Amity still doesn't want them to go into that specific memory, the one that she tried to damage, she tried to erase herself from. But all of the other memories that we see them fix anyway are memories that involve her and Willow as friends when they were younger. So clearly, the issue isn't that she, at least not exclusively, she doesn't want anyone to know that she and Willow used to be friends, because remember, Luce is there the whole time too. Her issue with going into that specific memory can't be that, because Luce already knows that. And so when they finally do go into that memory, followed there by the fiery inner Willow, who we can now see more as Willow due to a clever plan by Luce, it makes sense that we see what we see. Specifically, Willow's memory is of her best friend telling her they can't be friends anymore because Willow, someone who doesn't have control over magic yet, and barely even has it anyway, is too weak, something that would undoubtedly hurt her. Because we're in an interior headspace like this, Amity is able to show Willow the part of her memory that came right before that. They're at a party at Amity's house, where Amity's parents are, and her parents are just terrible people. And they say, Amity, you're a blight, and the blights only associate with the strongest of witchlings, and they give her an ultimatum. Either she dumps Willow as a friend, I feel I have to elaborate that or this review is going to get shippier than I want it to, or they will make sure that Willow never gets into Hexside on merit of her still being so weak at this point. And even if we can assume that they're bluffing, and we know they're not, because one of the descriptions of an episode next season proves that they're not. I'll leave it at that. Even if we assume that they're bluffing, though, remember, Amity is still a child now, in the present of this show. She was even younger then, and she's being issued this ultimatum by her parents, of all people. An ultimatum between remaining friends with her friend and being the reason, at least in her mind, and of course her parents would reinforce that over time, right? That her friend doesn't get to go to Hexside, or hurting her friend but saving her future. And that is not a decision that any child is equipped to make. As far as I'm concerned, while Amity does hurt Willow in that moment by ending their friendship, she is not to blame in this situation at all. But it does recontextualize what she did to the photo earlier in the episode and explain all of her behavior inside Willow's headspace. Because while, of course, one of her concerns was making sure people didn't make that connection between her and Willow to save her image now, she was also doing what Willow does. Because Willow even says it in this episode, out of sight, out of mind. She ignores her problems until they go away. And Amity was kind of trying to do the same thing. But she saw an opportunity to do it in a more literal kind of way. Literally erasing herself from that painful memory, and therefore, in a roundabout way, alleviating herself of some of the blame and some of the pain that comes with what happened. You can even argue that even if it wasn't intentional, some part of her might have thought that erasing herself from that moment might also retroactively make Willow feel better about the situation because she doesn't remember who hurt her anymore. And showing this to the inner Willow does get the inner Willow to forgive Amity and work with her and Luce to fix all of the pictures again, because the inner Willow was burning them all again. And even though at the end, once the two girls are back outside of Willow's head, the real Willow says that she and Amity still aren't friends again yet, if her inner self was willing to forgive Amity to the point that they're amicable by the end, you know that the real Willow is going to be too. And it's so interesting. This is such an interesting way of delivering character backstory. This whole episode is effectively exposition. Aside from the specific character stuff, where Amity does own up to her part in what happened, recontextualize it for Willow, and help Willow to start to heal by moving forward. The rest of this is exposition, and it's handled in such an interesting way that only a show like this one can give us. It feels very reminiscent of some of the ways that exposition was delivered in Steven Universe, in some of the best exposition-heavy episodes of that show. It's like, regardless of how I personally feel about Rose turning out to be Pink Diamond over on Steven Universe, the episode where we finally find that out is really freaking good, and it's basically this episode, but in the context of that show. And this explains so much about Willow. It explains why, despite the fact that she is a very powerful character now, and very competent and very confident in situations where she feels safe and secure, when she's faced with situations where she has to deal with people that she's not comfortable with, she kind of retreats into herself still. Because, as one of her formative memories, one of her friends told her to her face that she's not good enough. And that has stuck with her this entire time, regardless of who else she is and what else she's accomplished. Like, this part of the episode is so good that it's going to be shorter once I edit everything down, because I've had to redo takes and stuff. But I've been talking for like 25 minutes just about this one aspect of the episode. I haven't even touched on the fact that, for example, at the end, Amity, I'll say throws out, but she didn't literally throw it out because it's complicated. But she throws out the invitation to that party I mentioned earlier, signifying that she's moving away from those fake friends. Or Gus's plot, where he tortures Ida and King for a while, and then, as recompense, gets tortured by Hootie. Not going to elaborate on that, because it's genuinely freaking hilarious. Go watch it. But despite how good that stuff is, and how good the other backgroundy stuff about these characters is, I've gotten an entire review's worth of content out of just talking about this very specific relationship and the mechanism by which we learn about it. Like, this isn't some big lore episode or anything. That's not true. Learning about the characters' histories is also lore, but it's not like a big overarching series lore kind of episode. It drops some hints to stuff in here and there, like how terrible Amity's parents are, for example, and the fact that they have that much pull over the school. But really, this is just the character exposition. That's all it is, and I think it is genuinely one of the best realized episodes of this entire show. And of course, even if this isn't a big overarching story lore episode, this episode does inform things going forward. Not only do we have a better understanding of Willow and her character and her motivations now, giving us a better understanding of her decisions in future episodes, but the character dynamics change in a lasting way here. Amity now feels more part of Luce's entire group than she ever has up to this point. It has always up to this point felt like Amity was friends with those preppy girls over here and then Luce over here, but going forward, it feels more complicated than that. And considering my view that that moment where the two of them stopped being friends was traumatic for both of them, that they were both victims of that situation, it's nice to see that while this helps Willow to start healing going forward, it helps Amity to start healing too. Because again, while Amity was not blameless in the situation, she still did a bad thing. She was a child and was not to blame for it. Her parents are the villains here. Quite possibly literally. Like, her parents might actually be villains in this show. But only time will tell. But anyway, clearly I like this episode a lot. As per usual, though, I'd like to know, what do you guys think of it? Let's get a discussion going in the comment section down below. And while you're down there, you might as well like the video, share it with anyone else you think would enjoy my content, subscribe if you haven't. You can also check out the links to my various social medias and to all of the various ways you can help the channel. Those will be in the video description. But either way, this has been AJ22, and I will talk to you guys later.